Welcome back, everyone, to Two Rivers Tabac Book Club. My name's Andrew, and I'm joined by my co-host Josh.
Hello there.
Hello. So we just stopped talking about Part Five, the ending to the Dark Tower series, but now we wanted to do like just a separate episode. Probably not going to be as long. Just kind of talking about our overall thoughts on the series, kind of separated from the ending. We'll probably still obviously talk about the ending, but we're gonna kind of try to talk about it overall. Again, we do talk about spoilers. If you haven't read the Dark Tower series, we encourage you to go and do that before listening. And if there's anything we don't cover here that you want us to talk about or any themes, just let us know and we'd be happy to try to talk about it in the next episode. All right, overall thoughts on the whole series. So, I bashed some of the things in this book, I bashed some of the things in the previous book, but I still love this series as a whole. Like, I think it's an awesome series. I would recommend it to anyone. You know, the journey, as Stephen, I don't like that he tells us how to interpret it. I think if you're an artist or you're a writer or whatever, you should be proud of whatever you produce, and you should just let people interpret it as the way they want to. I don't think you need to tell people how to interpret it, right? If you wrote whatever you're doing, if you painted something, you wrote something, you created something creative, if it's done well enough, people will interpret what you're trying to go for. And he does it really well with the ending, with his theme. So like I don't really like the part where he's like telling us what to think, but the journey is amazing. Like the journey in this series is incredible. And I've talked about it like throughout this entire series, but like the blending of themes in this series is incredible. I mean, it's so difficult to describe this series to other people I've talked to when I say I'm reading this series and like, oh, what is it about? It's really tough to describe because they have a lot of different themes, right? You got obviously the prevailing theme of like Western desert theme, six shooter cowboy theme, but you also have sci-fi, you have some magic in there, you have parallel universes, the multiverse, you have this, Dark Tower, which is like the center of all the universes, and like I said, magic. So it's a really cool series overall, in my opinion. But that's kind of my overall take. But we'll get into more detail. What's kind of your overall thoughts on the series?
So my my overall thought is I would definitely reread this series. Probably not anytime soon. Like I kind of want it to settle for a bit longer
Right.
before rereading it and actually and picking up more what what the story has been building up to and how it shows how you can like foreshadow the ending. Like I want to see if because Stephen King even said he didn't know how it was gonna end,
Right.
but
Yeah.
as like a creative, like your mind knows kind of where it's trying to go, and by the time you finish it before it's like published, you can like go back and add in some foreshadowing if you want to, which I heard is what he did with the gunslinger uh when later on. So
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That
so
makes sense.
like the version we read has more shit put into it than its first publication
I see.
because
Gotcha.
its first publication was short stories.
Right. It was bare bones.
Uh so overall the the different blends of themes and different um uh kind of what's the word, like there's like you have horror, you have elements of horror in here, you have what like romance, you got action, sci-fi. It literally blends everything together in a series, which I have never seen before in anything I've read. So this has been probably one of the strangest things I've ever read. but
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but that's what I think makes it so beautiful and so wonderful to read. Even with all the cocks in it, but
That's part of the
but
journey. That's what
yeah,
makes it
it is
fun
part of the
too.
journey. It does. It really does. I would I recommend this to anybody? No, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. There's and the reason is because Stephen King is a lot more graphic, and he's not afraid to get kind of twisted in a way that might make some people uncomfortable. But for me, it's like I love horror, and so I'm just like okay, because there's a part even in the it was the third book when they're going to that it's basically New York City, but it's run down and controlled by the TikTok man, and they're like crossing the bridge, and this old man gets a hold of Jake, and he's telling them that he's like, I'll blow up the bridge if you don't give me the boy. And then he gets Jake, and Roland's like, I'll come save you later. But then the old man's like basically telling Jake he's gonna rape him, and Jake's like
Hmm.
11 years old. So it's like
Yeah.
if it's like if you don't have like the stomach or stuff for that, then don't even read Stephen King. Period. But but uh but yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who's willing who has the stomach for to like twisted stuff. Uh, and I mean, comparing this fantasy series to other fantasy series, or even just any other long series in general, this one just stands out as incredibly unique because it adds Stephen King's realism into a plethora of fantasy. Because like you could say the same for George, except the only difference with George R. R. Martin's is just that it's it's realism, medieval realism, low fantasy, but I feel like the Dark Tower series is modernish realism mixed in with mid fantasy. So it's like more fantasy than what we're given in in George R. R. Martin series, but less fantasy than something we would get in like Wheel of Time.
Right.
So and it's just fucking crazy. And even they even like like the
Yeah.
fictional story transfers into real life. So then it almost becomes like if you really want to think about it, it's like we're in the same universe as King. These events really happen to Stephen King. So if you know this is real, then it's like all this is actually real. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
oh shit. And you know, it's it's just crazy. It adds in like the multiverse, and I don't know. I feel like I'm just gonna be rambling at this point, but that's kind
No,
of
I
like
mean, yeah. Like like
that's kind of
you
yeah.
like you said, I mean, only it's the strangest series, but that's also what makes it amazing. It's like only Stephen King could like think of a series. Like I think to like specific books and specific events throughout this series. You think about like Blaine the Mono, like they play a riddle game with like a supercomputer train. They go to Magus and have like a cowboy standoff in the bar, and you have, like you said, you still have some romance. They have the
Yeah.
wolves sequence where they're fighting like robots. I mean, there's everything under the sun, man. You have like Eddie like trying to get out of the plane with all his coke, and he's like a cocaine mule, and like Roland is like in his brain, and they're like working together to get through this, and they have a shootout in New York and in Balazar's office. I mean, there's like everything, man. It's crazy. And then yeah, like towards the end, it gets kind of more meta where, Stephen King kind of interjects himself and makes it even more realistic, like, oh, all these events actually happened. I'm just like the medium for this series. It takes so many wild turns and has so many different themes. It's a really cool series. And
And
just off of that alone, like the ambition of that, you have to respect just that. Regardless of how you feel about the ending, I can definitely see why people would be upset about the ending and how the final crescendo happened. Just the raw like blending of themes alone and the amount of turns and unexpectedness the series has throughout the journey, you have to like respect that on its merit alone.
yeah, I I do get the feeling that the only person as of right now who could like write something so crude and still be very popular would be Stephen King because he's built up the reputation like that
Right,
to where he could write really like weird shit and not get too ridiculed
for sure.
socially over it just because he's already built up that kind of sense of reputation of this is Stephen King, you know what you're getting into.
For
So,
sure. I feel like
uh, yeah.
it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there though as well, because like you said, he's built up this reputation, but at the same time he puts that chapter in because he's anticipating all the backlash for the way it
Oh
kind of
yeah,
ends. So he does have that reputation built up of like he can write this crazy ass shit, but at the same time, he's clearly self conscious about how his readers will react. Which I would be curious to see if he wrote this series faster. Like, let's say he wrote that, like he was more interested in it, and he wrote it like all in the 70s and the 80s. Like he didn't waste time. Obviously, be a lot different series because there's events he uses that are more modern. But I would be
yeah,
interested to see how he would play it out without that pressure that comes
yeah,
from being such a big author. It's like with George R. R. Martin, right? He's experiencing all this pressure to complete Game of Thrones, especially with the TV show being a shit ending.
yeah.
It's like he has
Right.
even more pressure now, and of course you don't want your readers to be dissatisfied. So yeah, but
Yeah. But like I think that's also one of the another point of like the entire series in general is change because like at the end the reason Roland keeps having to redo these adventures for who God knows how many times is because he refuses to change significantly in his character development. Uh, and and since this story's been written over like 30 years, a time span around that much, uh, Stephen King's writing styles change. He gets wiser. He becomes a better writer as he goes on. So with every book being basically not completely different from the last one, but different enough to where you can start to see how King's writing has changed throughout the years. It's almost like this whole entire experience is based on the idea of change and character development, which circles back to Stephen King. It's like what you said earlier. If he would have written like in the 70s or 80s, like real quick, it probably would have been a completely different series because he wasn't the same person he was in the 70s that he was in the 80s, and he wasn't the same person in the 80s that he was in the 90s, 2000s. And so comparing Stephen King from who he was in the 70s to when the last book came out in 2004, completely different Stephen King. Like,
yeah, that's true. That's very true. And
which
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll say, which also makes this series one of the most interesting is
Right.
is because it's like Tolkien, for instance. He finished writing the entirety of Lord of the Rings back to back, and then it was released. So it wasn't like he released the Fellowship of the Ring, waited 10 years, wrote the Two Towers. And, it's just not. Uh, it's it was written so far apart and spaced apart, and in between so many other books he wrote. Which, again, it's like you go to Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan was like only writing Wheel of Time books for the most part.
Yeah.
So, uh, until his death, R.I.P. I'll miss you. Uh, but but Robert Jordan seemed to want to write these books, so he's going back to back writing these books. But Stephen King would like write a book, be like, okay, don't really want to write this. Write a bunch of other books, be like, oh fuck, I got to come back to this book. And so he kept doing that on and off. So I think that's what makes this series interesting, and it also I think is why when we start reading through other King books, why we'll start to see a lot of Dark Tower connections in those stories is because he even mentions this in the Dark Tower series where he's just like, I feel uh like it feels like Stephen King is subconsciously writing in the Dark Tower in these other books as he's writing them.
Yeah.
Cause so
Yeah, I mean definitely because it spans so many decades and so much change, like you said. It's very pretty much like his de facto magnum opus, right? Because I mean, even if he, and obviously he considers it to be his magnum opus, but let's say he like doesn't consider it to be his magnum opus, it kind of is his de facto one, just because it spans so much of his career, and you can see the differences in his writing style as his career progresses, and like you said, the prevailing theme really throughout the whole series is change and how people need to change and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So,
oh yeah, go ahead.
no, you can go. I was.
So I'm interested. I know you mentioned this in the previous video, but like the comment being like one of the comments saying, the last few books kind of seem rushed compared to the first few books, just because it seems like he's just trying to get it done because everybody wanted it to just get done, right? And even like obviously, I know you talked about he wrote the last three books all together, and then they released them a few years apart, but they were all written at that point. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, what's kind of your do you kind of agree with that where it feels a little bit more rushed, or do you think it's like a good pace, or
I I feel like it's rushed in a sense to where he wanted to finish the series, which is why he stopped at all his other works and just focused on the Dark Tower. I disagree in the sense where he rushed it without considering where the story should be or what the conclusion should be, because he obviously didn't release it until he thought it was done. So in a sense to where yeah, he rushed through the 3 books and just writing it to get it finished, but I don't think he would've skimped out on what he wanted the ending to convey, because he at the end of the day, he has the final say, and, these are done. Publish them or edit them, publish them. So, uh I guess I would say I agree to disagree. I agree in some aspects, but in the finished work, I would disagree.
yeah, no, that's fair.
What do you think?
I do kind of view maybe not like from a rushing perspective necessarily, but I do almost in at least in my brain kind of view the first few books differently than I view the last few books. Like the first three or four books, um, I view a little. I don't know if I just like them a little better, just because obviously it was really exciting. Like Eddie joining the quartet and like Susanna joining Jake, getting Jake back in mid world when he's having the weird like I'm alive, I'm not alive thing, and then we have the Susan Delgado story, and then we have the quartet like kind of going on their adventures. So I almost view that as like a separate half, and then the latter half of the series, it's like we get a little bit more meta. The quartet isn't necessarily like the focus anymore. Like we've had enough development at this point, and we're kind of just like going through a few more journeys before the Dark Tower. I don't really necessarily. It does feel, this book definitely feels like. I mean, I guess you could have wrote more for sure, and maybe people were just expecting there to be more of like a crescendo for like each character, but it's definitely like written in a way where like each character is killed off very quickly and each enemy is killed off really quickly. It's not like a big ordeal. So in that sense, you could kind of interpret it as being a little bit more rushed, but at the end, once we're like completely done with the series and now that we've read part 5 and seen the ending, I think it's fine, you know? Like um but I
Yeah.
could see how someone would maybe interpret it that way. But I guess as like an overall thing, it doesn't really matter to me. I think this series is still very good regardless.
So, uh, what do you think of? Because so When Through the Keyhole
Mhm.
came out after he finished the series.
Mhm.
And at the end of When Through the Keyhole, we find Merlin, then turned into a tiger. Like, do you think Merlin is the Crimson King, or do you think they're different characters, or have
Um,
you thought about it?
I haven't thought about that, and I guess yeah, I was gonna bring up that as well, like the wind through the keyhole in general, because obviously it was written after. But Merlin being the Crimson King, I don't really think so, because I don't think the Crimson King would like be like give. I can't even remember the kid's name now. Um, Giving him like that tier to like help his mom and stuff like that. I don't think he would necessarily like do that. So I don't really think they're the same person.
I I just looked up Merlin's wiki in the Dark Tower. Uh, it's a little long, uh, but because I was like, gonna I wanted to like read a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah, for sure. I mean,
but
like looking back on the wind through the keyhole now, I know when we read it, we kind of talked about like would there be, things that we'd notice towards the end here that relate back to this really long story. Because like really, the wind through the keyhole was like, yeah, the Skin Man was like the antagonist, and it was like a younger Roland with Jamie. And this is like his adventure with Jamie, so that there's reference to like, okay, we understand who like Jamie is now. But really, the focus of that story was like that part two story where like it was about the kid and his mom and God, I can't remember the guy's name, but the asshole stepdad.
yeah, I remember.
I can't like now that I guess we'll have to like go back and like look at it some more in the wikis maybe, but I don't even like see the significance of like that story, the kid's story, obviously with the stepdad and stuff, as it relates to the rest of the series, other than like maybe Merlin has something to do with it. Um,
You know, reading this wiki description of it's just I'm like, holy shit. He plays such a big role. I feel like that's why it's like with rereading these books, but also a lot of King's other books relate to the Dark Tower too, right? So
right, yeah.
when reading this description and learning all this stuff, I'm just like, huh. So I wonder, since we've only read the Dark Tower books, did I miss something? And we've only read each book one time, so it's like, okay. Wonder if rereading all, we just learned a lot more than like if I'll learn the stuff that I just read in these other books, or some of this even relates to the comics. Like there's Gunslinger comics.
Okay. Well, yeah, they're gonna go
Uh,
like super in depth in the wiki, obviously. But like,
yeah,
I guess to like the casual reader, maybe like you said, if we read more books, maybe the Merlin thing will have like more significance. But like to me, it's almost like I'm not sure why that huge story was in the wind through the keyhole because it doesn't like relate that much to the Dark Tower series, at least from like a casual perspective,
yeah.
in my
Because
opinion.
after reading the wiki, like, do you just want me to tell you? I mean, you pretty.
Yeah, yeah.
So basically, the gist is Merlin created uh the North whatever positronics. I already just exited. Sorry. So
Okay.
basically, the corporation we're fighting against was created against Merlin, or created against Merlin's corporation. So, uh, he also was like, Merlin was the reason that there was like the downfall of the world, because he was the one who wanted to take the power away from. So in Stephen King's universe, I guess Gan is
Right.
God.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so he wanted to take power away from Gan. So that's why he started with the breakers and all that, to take power away from the tower and fuse technology with magic, is why we get a lot of these why we get all this futuristic technology and stuff in the series. But doing this somehow led to the downfall of, so
Okay. So I guess that story would like explain how he gets out of his prison and starts doing his shit because obviously he's trapped until that story happens.
Yeah, and we have like Randall Flagg, basically, uh, helping Will get go on this journey
I
to
see.
eventually
Okay.
release Merlin,
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
and after reading the wiki, it turns out that Randall Flagg is Merlin's son.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I don't know what book we'll find that out in, but but I mean, I'm assuming you don't really care. I mean, or I don't know. Maybe we were found.
No, I'm glad you cleared that up because that makes a lot more sense as to the significance of that story now. Because obviously the Skin Man stuff makes sense as why you put that in there, but like this the story with Tim or whatever, it makes a lot more sense now as to why that was in there.
See, it was literally like the backstory to the whole enemy of the Dark Tower, disguised, but with Tim as like a regular children's story. Isn't that insane? Because out of all the went through the keyhole videos I've seen, no one has ever talked about that. Where it's like,
That's wild, and I mean it makes sense, but that's what I'm saying is like from a casual reading perspective, I don't know how the hell I would connect that. You know what I mean?
yeah, you would literally have to be obsessed, read all the
Right.
books, and like analyze it as its own thing, or you could just read the wiki.
But like I mean the story itself is fun anyway, so even like I guess if you don't interpret it as part of that sequence, it's still a really fun book.
Yeah, because I don't know if I'm just stupid or wasn't paying enough attention, but like I guess I had no idea Merlin was basically like the enemy.
Right.
But when the Crimson King was being described, to it,
Oh
my
yeah, good
first
point.
thought,
Yeah, he's like a wizard.
yeah,
True.
it's like my first thought came to Merlin, but it seemed like the Crimson King didn't like have any power left. All he had were those snitches.
Yeah, I would think he would use magic. And then like I guess if Merlin's such an asshole, I don't know why he gave the tear to Tim. He could have just
Well,
told
Tim
Tim to
did free
fuck
him.
off. I mean, yeah, but like I mean if Merlin's such an asshole, I would think he would just say fuck you, but I guess it's the, you know, I guess it makes sense. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, we're not like scholars or anything. Like I'm not like a freaking, you
yeah,
know, I don't have like a
yeah,
PhD in literature or anything. So obviously I'm like a casual reader. Like I would not be able to like interpret that without
yeah.
help.
I'm probably just over analyzing it because like
No, I mean that makes. I'm glad you said because like yeah, I mean it makes sense why that story's in there now.
because now well because I'm thinking now because I remember back when and went through the keyhole when Tim was like looking at like getting the keys and stuff. There was a plaque that said like RF and I want to say it was CK. I can't really remember. So it's like okay, so Randall Flagg and Crimson King are on this plaque, but well,
Oh yeah, good
I
point.
just have to reread it because there's no way I'm gonna remember that. That was books ago.
Yeah.
But overall, I guess if we cut went through the keyhole out, I feel like all the books kind of flow better. But adding went through the keyhole adds more uh, of of a history with the enemy. Because the whole time we really don't know that much about the enemy until like the
Yeah.
very end.
Right.
And even then we're not really given that much information. So
No.
uh
And it gives you,
and
you
yeah,
know, the another little adventure with young Roland and like you get introduced to Jamie and stuff. But
yeah. So it
yeah.
was guess we already really discussed the end of the Dark Tower in our last video, so we
Yeah.
don't really need to talk about that. Would you I know we haven't finished Wheel of Time yet, so it'd be unfair to compare series, but we both read Lord of the Rings, and this might be a real hard comparison, but which one did you enjoy better?
Yeah, I mean that's tough for me just because like Lord of the Rings is like my childhood fantasy series, so it's hard for me to like ever like even if we, let's say we read Wheel of Time and like the ending is insane and it's amazing, Lord of the Rings will never like be beat to me because like it's a childhood nostalgic thing for me, right? And
Yeah.
it opened my
Yeah.
mind to like these other series. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I like this ending because I think it's in theme with like Stephen King and like the way he writes. Could there be things that he could have elaborated more on? For sure. Are there things he could have, had a more like boom, like bang ending for some of the characters? Yeah, for sure. But it's fine. I think the ending is good. I think part of the reason Lord of the Rings is powerful is it was written in drafts, right? Like Tolkien didn't he wrote all of them like he wrote them obviously fairly close together. It wasn't like decades like Dark Tower, but he did have multiple drafts of them. He had tons of drafts. And there's, pictures of like all the papers on his desk where he like write little notes in the margins and stuff for adding things in or like changing things. So he had a lot of iterations, almost like Roland getting another shot at it. So I think if Stephen King did a similar thing where like he talked about possibly doing multiple drafts, and if he did multiple drafts, I think he can make it better with each, you know, time he wrote it. But I think it's fine. I'm not. I can't compare it to Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
though, just because like I'm always gonna pick Lord of the
Maybe,
Rings.
maybe instead of picking which one is better, but like more like compare and contrast.
Yeah, yeah.
The Dark Tower series feel for more of a modern audience. I think it's written better. But that just has to do with the times. Lord of the Rings was written like 100 years ago, so
Absolutely.
or however, I mean, almost 100. How old is Lord of the Rings?
It's pretty old. Yeah, I think it was in the
When
40s.
was Lord of the Rings published?
Because I know he served in World War
Oh,
One.
1954.
Yeah, I think it was like
So
right
no,
after
not.
World War Two. Because he served in World War One. I can't remember if he served in World War Two, but he didn't write it until he was done with that. But
It's been almost 70 years.
yeah, I feel like I view Lord of the Rings as like the foundation. Like it's a classic fantasy series that is the foundation for all these series. Like without Lord of the Rings, you don't have these other series, in my opinion.
When was The Gunslinger published by Stephen King? So we got 1954, and The Gunslinger was published, I guess originally published in 1978.
Nice.
So 54, we got 54,
24 years.
64, 74. Yeah, so that's honestly, that's only like, okay, so think about this. That's only like a 24-ish year difference, right? Uh, and you read both of them, and they both are written like completely different. And I mean, and obviously, like Tolkien was a wordsmith, like he was all about literature and all that
Mm-hmm.
shit. So,
Mm-hmm.
and he wrote his differently. He wrote more of like a history book. So it's like, uh, but to think that's only like 24 years, that's not long, like at all. But it
Yeah, but
goes to,
like that
but
is
Stephen,
true. But Lord of the
but
Rings was insanely popular.
yeah.
Like insane even back then.
Well, that Tolkien was way older than Stephen King was when Stephen King wrote Dark Tower. Like, what Stephen King was like his mid-20s. Tolkien was already
Right.
like old as fuck
Yeah, he was old bitch.
when. So it's interesting comparing them both, because even though
Yeah.
they weren't published that far apart, uh, it's just the amount of how old both of them were, and the different times they grew up in. Because like,
Yeah.
I mean, I could see Stephen King like at some sort of activist rally like when his youth. I could definitely see that. Tolkien, no, dude, that that
No, he
guy
was
that guy's fighting for
very, yeah,
freedom and
he was very
and
traditional
yeah. So
Victorian
uh,
Englishman.
I really did like all the I mean all the Lord of the Rings references in the Dark Tower series, especially when Eddie talked about loving it, and I'm like, damn
Oh
right, Eddie.
yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, Stephen King even talks about like it's inspired by Lord. It's inspired by Lord of the Rings, like the series he wrote, and like I I very much view Lord of the Rings as like it's the foundational piece for all these other series, Game of Thrones, Dark Tower, whatever you want to talk about. But like at least like from the perspective of like a long fantasy series and like the journey, right? Because it was
Yeah.
so popular. It was so popular that it like made it into the mainstream that you could write these long series, right? That was like a fantasy series. So like not
Mm.
even like the themes being the same between the Dark Tower and Lord of the Rings, but like obviously they both have like a hero's journey kind of, but like Lord of the Rings just kind of opened the door with it being so popular for like these other series to be popular. So, but I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, Dark Tower is really good. I mean, it's an awesome
What
series.
What was your favorite penis description
Oh
in the
God,
Dark
dude,
Tower
there's
series?
many, so many. I think
I yeah.
no, you go. You can go
Which one?
first. Yeah, you go.
Uh, I'm I'm like I'm torn between the one through in went through the keyhole where they like this they go apart and they're talking about like the big woman with the big tits that
Yep.
was talking to Roland, young Roland, about the shapeshifter and was like, I saw its prick. It was curved like a scimitar. It meant to fuck her while
Yep.
she died. And then Roland's just like, what? So it's like, so that one was pretty funny. And then the other one I'm torn between is badass because it's when Susanna fights back
Oh
against the
yeah,
demon
true.
when they're trying to have
Jake come through the portal.
Jake. God damn it! I'm like,
Yeah.
how the hell did I forget Jake's name?
Jake.
It's late. But anyway, so they're trying to distract the demons so they can get Jake to come to the portal, and Susanna is basically raping this demon.
Yep.
Which at first, like the demon was raping her, but then she said, "Fuck this! Not gonna let that happen to me." And I'm like, "Fuck yes, Susanna, we could." And then describe that demon's penis as being cold and cold and basically dark, just not feeling good. And so it
Yeah.
was like, and so it's when thinking about both these instances is like, and went through the keyhole. It's like they're both like kind of horror, but I feel like went through the keyhole is more horror, where it's like this is just an animal, unhinged, brute of a thing, and that's like the horror of it is how savage, primal.
Yeah.
But this other one, this other demon, is more sinister, more calculating, more thriller esque rather than horror. And so both of those different like kind of themes of penis descriptions are very interesting and
Yeah.
unique. And what was yours?
Well, building on the demon dick perspective, Mordred's penis was pretty funny and and disgusting. There's a lot of demon dicks in this series.
Oh,
Oh my
oh my
god.
god.
It's a great series.
Oh, it's fantastic. I loved every inch of
Oh
uh,
man.
if I didn't fuck the succubus, it would have seduced
It
Jake and
would
fucked him
fucked
to
him to
death.
death. Every damn book it's mentioned.
every
Every book.
every damn book. There's even in read. I can't wait. I'll reread The Stand with you.
Yeah, no,
Like,
we'll definitely do that at some point.
because you'll love. Well, I guess I've already showed you that one. It's
Yeah,
hilarious.
absolutely. Pistons.
Ah, you like that happy crappy? Just what the fuck? But
Yeah.
uh,
What do you give the whole like series, I guess, if we're just gonna give it like a straight up rating, like 1 to 5? What would you give it?
um, I I guess I guess I would probably have to give it a 5. And
Mm-hmm.
the main reason is because the ending theme of Roland and where he ended up and why he ended up that way to me was satisfying. And and you can, if with a reread or even like looking back, you can see that being built up. And having Stephen King tell you that he doesn't know how, but still get to that conclusion and still have it make sense from when he first wrote it in the 70s. So not only was it written throughout like a 30 years, but to have the first books kind of foreshadowing and whatnot events make sense in the ending, uh is honestly remarkable to me. And I also give it a 5 because I loved all the main characters throughout the whole series. I loved seeing all of them interact with each other and seeing them grow as people. And at some points, they felt pretty real to me, which Stephen King is very good at doing. Uh, so I'm not going to be like one of those people who's like, "Oh, I'm going to give it a 5 just because it's long and I finished it." Blah blah. It's good. No, it gets a 5 because of the way Stephen King writes these characters. It's just they're just so well flushed out and feel like real people that you grow attached to them. So yeah, and that's basically my conclusion on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same. I'm probably gonna just give it a 5. Like you said, the characters are really relatable, and it's a lot of fun learning about them and seeing them interact together. And yeah, I was totally, gripped by the story, especially when they're like, in the drawing of the three when they get all together. I love the Mage's story. I thought it was awesome. I even liked, the Win Through the Keyhole story. I like all the adventures they went on, and I also feel like I don't think I'm ever gonna read a series that is even remotely like this one. And
Oh yeah.
it's just on that alone, I think it's at minimum of 4, just because it's just so unique and unpredictable. Um, and there's a lot of demon dicks, but
Oh, my favorite part.
yeah, but yeah, no, I think I would also give it a 5, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's like, yeah, like you said, who's interested in who's able to handle like a horror story, because obviously there's horror elements, but it's an awesome series. I'm very glad we read it.
Me too. I'm glad we finished it.
I
Like,
know.
you know, if if you could ask Stephen King one question, what would it
I don't know, man. I'd probably, I don't know. What would you ask while I think about it?
say? I would ask him if uh by the end of his journey when he gets to rest, what would be at the top of the dark tower? Like would he just would he even enter the dark tower for it to be a good ending? Or if he did enter the dark tower, would the top room be different? So let me say that in a more way. Would is Roland's perfect ending for him to end the loop and suffering? Would it be to save the Dark Tower but deny confronting it and just living out the rest of his life in peace? Or
Mm-hmm.
would it be saving the Dark Tower with as a changed man with high moral love to then enter the Dark Tower, and then would there be something different at the top of the tower? Or would it be every time he even enters the tower, no matter what, he is forced to redo the whole journey because the whole point is to not give in to the obsession or give in to the fix? Like Eddie said at the very beginning of the series, where it's like, heroin was my fix and the Dark Tower is yours.
Mm-hmm.
So does he just have to learn to get to rid of the fix? Like, so that would kind of be along the lines of what I would ask him.
Yeah, like kind of like what would be like the parameters for like a good ending, I guess, for Roland. Like what does he need to do? I'd probably ask him about like the pressure he felt writing this series and like how that affected the series as a whole. Like did he feel rushed? You know, like the person is saying in the comments, like did he feel rushed to write these? Did he feel pressured to write these? So I guess it'd be less about the series, but more about like obviously 19 whatever whenever he wrote this, what was it, 1978? 1978 Stephen King didn't experience the same amount of pressure that 2001 Stephen King would experience to finish this. So I'd be curious as to like how that maybe affected things for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I mean that's pretty much, I think that's pretty much all I got, but overall it was an
Yeah.
awesome series. It was the first long series we completed. I'm glad we read it.
And we read like the first Dark Tower books, like we read it and then went and read something else and then came back to it. And then when we got to like the last 4 books, we just busted it out. So it's almost
Yeah.
like we did the same thing Stephen King did, where like we read the first book, read Wheel of Time, read the second book, read Time, read the third book, read Wheel of Time, or read other stuff. And then once we went through the keyhole, we just busted it out and
Yeah,
read the whole thing.
that's a good point. Every time we came back to this series, I was always really excited to read it. And like every book that we finished, I was excited to read the next one. So,
Yeah, I thought I would be more sad that it's over, but I feel satisfied in a way to where I don't another Dark Tower. Like I'm good on this series.
honestly, I feel the same as well. Like I thought it would be a little bit more like bittersweet, but I think yeah, it was ready to end. Like the series was ready to be completed, and I thought it was completed, well enough. So, yeah, I'm with you where I'm ready to read other things. And
Yeah,
maybe one day, reread this again. But for now, I think I'm satisfied with the way it ended.
yeah. Put this on the wall of achievements.
I know.
Bookshelf of
Well, I have a
achievements.
list like in my phone of all the books we've read, so I'm trying to like keep track just because it'll be fun to like review it one day. But
Right.
I guess we should mention too we're gonna read Fairy Tale next. So
Oh yeah.
keeping with the Stephen King theme, but
Yeah. At least for a little bit.
yeah,
Well,
cool.
I think these conversations helped me finally put this to rest.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Cool. Well, I don't have anything else.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. We appreciate you, if you're listening, the 2 listeners out there. We finally got to the end of the series, but it was really good. Like we said, we're going to read Fairy Tale next, but we'll see you next time.
Smell you later, Red.
See ya.